to the ordinary meeting of Council for the 27th of April 2021, which I now declare open. Although members of the public can't join us in person tonight, our meetings remain open to the public via the live stream on our website, and I extend a warm welcome to all of you who are watching. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which Moonee Valley is located, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their spirits, ancestors, community members and elders past, present and emerging. We also extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Item 3 on the agenda is apologies and leave of absence, and councillors, I've not received any apologies for tonight's meeting. Item 4, confirmation of minutes, and councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the council meeting held on Tuesday the 13th of April 2021 be confirmed. Moved Councillor Bedio, seconded Councillor Byrne. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, and that's carried unanimously. Item number 5, declarations of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda this evening? Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a conflict of interest for item 10.3 for reasons already declared to the CEO.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Any other councillor have a conflict of interest in an item this evening? Councillor Isa.
Mayor, I'd like to declare a conflict, a general conflict of interest for item 10.6.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Any other councillor wish to declare a conflict of interest? If not, I also need to declare a general conflict of interest in item 10.7, award of contract number 2441, Move Facilities Health Club equipment, for reasons previously disclosed to the CEO in writing prior to the commencement of the meeting. The Deputy Mayor will step into the chair at that time. Item 6, presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations tonight? Councillor Tyson.
Mayor, I'd just like to acknowledge the meeting that we had with the Nidri traders on the 16th of April, 2 Fridays ago. It was a really productive meeting attended by Councillor Sypek, Councillor Byrne and the Deputy Mayor. Discussions ranged from hopefully future upgrades of the precinct, issues through COVID, through all the businesses there, which range not just from retail and hospitality, but a range of other businesses, services, hardware, you name it. We've got it on Keilor Road. So it was a very productive meeting. We're looking forward to meeting them again soon, and thanks very much to everyone that attended.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tyson. Any other presentations, councillors? Councillor Isa.
Mayor, I'd just like to present a beautiful collection of 6 books that I'll just hold up here if that's okay. These books have been written through a grant, a Moonee Valley grant, and they are nursery rhymes, well-known nursery rhymes that have been translated into Woiwurrung by Auntie Gail. And last Friday night, we launched these books at the Sam Merrifield Library, and these books will be placed in all maternal child health nurse centres, in early learning centres and kindergartens across Moonee Valley, and we look forward to children being able to learn nursery rhymes in our First Nations language of this area. So it's really lovely to be part of that evening on Friday.
Thank you, Councillor Isa, and we congratulate Auntie Gail on the books. Councillors, any other presentations? Councillor Adams.
On the 21st of April, Councillor Sharp and myself had the honour of officiating a ceremony to unveil a commemorative plaque with Rotary Club of Essendon North at Woodlands Park that recognises 100 years of Rotary in Australia and New Zealand and the proud service of Rotarians to the city of Moonee Valley. Rotary Australia has grown from 4 clubs opening in Melbourne, Auckland, Wellington and Sydney in 1921 to having over 30,000 members today. Councillor Sharp and myself were joined by Councillor Isa, Councillor Byrne, as well as Rotary Club of Essendon North President Paul Burdett in celebrating a century of making a difference here in Moonee Valley and around the globe.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Any other councillors have a presentation this evening? If not, I will just note that I had the opportunity to be guest speaker at the Airport West Uniting Church Men's Group, and they presented a donation on our behalf to the Cancer Council Victoria for speaking at their event, which is much appreciated. If there are no more presentations, I will move to item 7, petitions and joint letters. I understand we have 2 joint letters to be presented this evening. The first joint letter is titled, "The commencement of the required processes to discontinue the unused and blocked off right of way at the rear of properties in Diamond Street, Essendon West off Rose Hill Road." Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move that Council resolves to A, receive and note the joint letter regarding the commencement of the required process to discontinue the unused and blocked off right-of-way at the rear of properties in Diamond Street, Essendon West, brackets off Rose Hill Road. B, referred this matter to the Director of Enabling Services for investigation and reporting back to Council. And C, advise the lead contact of the joint letter accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sypek. Councillor Byrne, do you wish to speak to the motion and petition? No? Councillor Sypek? We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. The second joint letter is titled, "The Removal and Replacement of 2 Casuarina Trees in Kingsley Road, Airport West." Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sypek.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's that Council resolved to receive and note the joint letter regarding the removal and replacing of 2 Casuarina trees in Kingsley Road, Airport West. Refer this matter to the Director of Service Deliveries for investigation and report back to Council, and advise the lead contact of the joint letter accordingly. I would probably suggest we could probably do this municipality-wide with these kind of trees, because I don't like them myself either.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. I'll get a seconder for your motion. Seconder for the motion. Councillor Byrne.
That last bit wasn't in the motion.
Correct. The motion finished at advise the lead contact of the joint letter accordingly. Councillor Sypek, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor. These have been a bit of a problem tree for us, as they do cause a lot of subterranean damage to a lot of our infrastructure. It also has a lot of needles that fall from this tree as well, which causes tripping hazards. So it is probably, it's not indigenous to this area, but I'm sure a lot of trees, like the big gum trees in around East Kew and Avondale Heights, weren't indigenous, but they're a part of our environment now, so we just have to deal with them case by case.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Byrne, wish to speak to the motion?
Just that we're obviously receiving a report back. I know that we've got good policies in around tree removal. Obviously, we don't want to be going around removing trees for every petition that we get, but it'll be interesting to see what the report comes back with, because obviously there are circumstances that it is necessary to do so. So waiting for it to come back would be great. Thank you, because I know it's been a long-term issue.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Sypek, wish to close?
No, I'm happy for that.
Put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We now move to public question time, and we've received 13 questions from members of the community for tonight's meeting. As we do not have residents in the public gallery tonight, I propose we move to suspend the provisions in our governance rules requiring questioners to be present in the gallery. That will enable me to read the questions that have been submitted in advance and for the CEO to read the responses. Councillors, could I please have a mover that Council resolves to temporarily suspend the public question provisions in its governance rules to allow questions from the gallery to be read by the Mayor and responses read out by the CEO. Moved Councillor Sypek, seconded Councillor Tyson. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. So the first question this evening is from Anne Bailey. Anne's question relates to agenda item 10.2 and it reads, with regards to the proposed construction of the childcare centre at 69 to 69C Hotham Road, Niddrie, and the car parking at part of 24 Rutland Street, Niddrie, it states in Table 1 that the parking proposed for the staff cars at rear of 24 Rutland Street won't require any construction. This is currently a residential site. The applicant is proposing to install a car stacker to comply with the parking requirement for the daycare centre staff. Is not a car stacker similar to a commercial parking facility, i.e. a garage, and therefore similar to a building that would require a construction of sorts? I'll pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Anne. Through the Mayor. The planning permit application has sought the applicable permission under Clause 32.08-9 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. Construct a building or construct or carry out works for a Section 2 use, which includes the installation of a car stacker system. The description of the proposal in Table 1 makes reference to work associated with the car parking facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. The next two questions this evening come from Glenn and Joan Santos. Their questions also relate to the agenda item 10.2, and the first question reads, the provision of a car stacker within 24 Rutland Street further exacerbates the conversion of Rutland Street into a commercial area. Car stackers also use a considerable amount of power, which could be viewed as increased greenhouse gases and flies in the face of Council's MV 2040 Action Plan Green. Car stackers are normally installed in underground car parks to avoid excessive vibrations and noise. How can this be viewed as a solution to the parking problem? I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Glenn and Joe. Through the Mayor. The use of car stackers is an accepted solution for the provision of on-site car parking, subject to compliance with the design standards of Clause 52.06-9 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. In this case, compliance is generally achieved with the permit conditions recommended relating to the management of the stacker system as well as the noise impacts through the submission of an amended acoustic report. The objective and strategies of Clause 15.02-1L, environmentally sustainable development of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, are relevant to the proposal, which align with the objectives and actions contained within the MV 2040 Green Action Plan. The proposal addresses these requirements through the submission of a sustainable design assessment, incorporating sustainable elements into the design and function of the building. In the event a permit is issued, an amended sustainable design assessment will be endorsed, which will be required to maintain a score that achieves best practice in sustainable design. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Glenn and Joan's second question reads, the Section 57A amendment to this planning application does not reduce the issues relating to parking, noise levels and privacy on a quiet residential street that Rutland presently is. This development adversely affects the enjoyment of life and the well-being of the residents who live on Rutland Street. How do the conditions of permit, as shown in the application form, address the concerns of residents? I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Glenn and John. Through the Mayor, a number of recommended permit conditions are included to manage, mitigate and provide enforceable mechanisms around issues which have been raised as concerns by objectors. A condition requiring the submission of a car parking management plan would manage the safe operation of the car parking and access arrangement and protect the residential amenity of the area. Requirements are also made for the submission of amended waste management and acoustic reports, which will manage impacts associated with waste collection activities and noise emissions. The recommended use conditions set out operational parameters and general amenity requirements for the land use, providing enforceable mechanisms in the event there are unreasonable impacts on the amenity of surrounding dwellings and the wider area. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. The next question comes from Nina Franceschi. Nina asks, is Council aware of the costs the Royal Soccer Club charge for profit-making summer elite programs and for any other projects that they may contemplate should they obtain sole tenancy? I'll pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Nina. Through the Mayor, Council has not requested information regarding the income generated by the Royals Soccer Club at this stage. Understanding the club's requirements for community-based seasonal activity will inform future decisions about access to Council's facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Nina's second question reads, is Council aware that sole tenancy is against its very own MV 2040 action plan, community facilities, which states newly developed or upgraded community sports pavilions should seek to consolidate facilities and increase the supply of multi-purpose spaces. This would achieve efficient use of land and increase utilisation. I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Nina. Through the Mayor, Council is aware of the quoted information and remains committed to ensuring community facilities are well used and meet the needs of Moonee Valley residents, services, and community groups. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. The next two questions come from Alex Mungle and relate to agenda item 10.4, Budget 2021-22. Alex's first question reads, could Council please advise how they intend to make good on the climate emergency declaration? I have reviewed the forthcoming budget and see no line item for expenditure on this. In some cases, e.g. solar, expenditure on new assets will pay for itself within 5 years, then be a net financial gain to the community, yet I do not see the expenditure budgeted. I'll pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Alex. Through the Mayor, Council's 2021-22 budget is due to commence a 28-day public consultation period after endorsement at tonight's Council meeting. This consultation period provides the community the opportunity to provide feedback and request additional funding. Following endorsement of the draft budget for community consultation, this question will be registered for consideration as part of the established draft budget submission process and responded to as part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Alex's second question reads, as the largest organisation in our municipality and a council which has acknowledged and declared climate emergency, how will you enact the annual reduction in emissions required to reach net zero by 2030 as outlined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, to avoid further catastrophic change? I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Alex. Through the Mayor, in February 2021, Moonee Valley City Council was certified carbon neutral for all its operations under the federal government's Climate Active Standard. It means all of our operations in 2019-20 year, everything from powering our facilities to lighting our streets, had a zero carbon footprint. We are also committed to supporting our community to reduce their own emissions through education and engagement, including behavior change programs such as Greens Living, Sustainability Champions, My Smart Garden, piloting energy efficiency audits for low-income households and businesses, offering to enter into environmental upgrade agreements with commercial building owners who want to make sustainable upgrades to the operations. We cannot do this alone and need the support of state and federal government to create the policy and legislative setting needed to best support the community to respond to the climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Question 8 comes from Teresa Day, who asks Council, the draft Council Budget 21-22 does not contain a single reference to solar, energy, electric, EV, climate, greenhouse emissions or carbon, and therefore no budget for community emissions reduction projects. Given that we are in a climate emergency, this is incomprehensible. Can you please explain why the Council is not allocating serious budget to climate emergency in this budget round? I'll pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Teresa. Through the Mayor, I refer to my earlier response regarding the 28-day consultation period due to commence following the endorsement of the draft budget. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Question 9 also comes from Teresa Day. Teresa's question reads, given that Council acknowledged and declared the climate emergency in October 2019 and set interim community emission targets mid-last year with targets for 2025, how does the Council propose to meet these targets without allocating resources to it? I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Teresa. Through the Mayor, I refer you again to my response to the previous question advising that a 28-day consultation period due to commence following tonight's endorsement of the draft budget. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. The next 2 questions come from Katrina Neville. Katrina asks, from my reading, the draft Council budget does not contain even a single reference to solar, energy, electric, EV, climate, greenhouse emissions or carbon. Given that we are in a climate emergency, this is incomprehensible. Can you please explain? I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Katrina. Again, I refer you to my response to the previous question. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Katrina's second question reads, what additional measures will Council introduce to ensure cafes, restaurants and food trucks in Moonee Valley compost their food waste and compostable takeaway containers cutlery to prevent the waste they generate from going into landfill and contributing to our overall greenhouse gas emissions? I'll again pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Katrina. Through the Mayor, at Moonee Valley City Council, we are committed to reducing waste to landfill and greenhouse gas emissions. Our current strategy, MV 2040, aims to divert 90% of household waste from council operations by 2040. As this question relates to imposing measures on private businesses, more investigations is required by officers to address this issue in more detail. I will therefore put this question on notice. A written copy of the answer will be sent to you. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Question 12 comes from Logan Shield. Logan asks Council, why were community submissions to the budget process in relation to climate change never considered in the 2020-21 budget or the end of 2020 budget update? I'll pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Logan. Through the Mayor, the budget submission process is undertaken annually in accordance with the Local Government Act. For your submission last year, you received a formal response in June 2020. Your suggestions were referred to the Environment Portfolio Committee, and a review of the information was undertaken. The committee prepared a report of budget impacts for management review. As a result of this review, which included all known budget impacts as well as the committee's report, it was recommended to Council that a revised budget was not required, as reported in the December Finance Report. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. The final question for this evening also comes from Logan Shield, and it reads, were community submissions in relation to climate change, which were originally submitted as part of the 2020-21 budget process, considered as part of the 2021-22 draft budget development process? And if so, why was no funding allocated towards tackling climate change? I'll pass to our CEO, Helen Swee, to respond.
Thank you, Logan. Through the Mayor, as mentioned to the previous question, the budget submission process is undertaken annually, and there will be a 28-day public consultation period following the endorsement of the draft budget tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. We now move to item 10, council reports, and 10.1 on the agenda is 4 Homer Street and 687 Mount Alexander Road, Moonee Ponds, land in plan of consolidation 379163T, construction of a multi-storey building accommodating ground floor retail, residential hotel, dwellings and works within a road zone. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Bedio.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with an amendment to Condition 4. Condition 4 to state, concurrent with the submission of plans for endorsement under Condition 1, an updated wind impact assessment must be submitted to and approved by the responsible authority. The assessment must be generally in accordance with that undertaken by VIPAC engineers and scientists, but modified to address the changes shown on plans to be endorsed under Condition 1. The assessment must also undertake a comprehensive scale model wind tunnel test of the proposed development and surrounding properties to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, including the approved development at 8 to 24 Everidge Street, Moonee Ponds. The assessment must clearly reference all relevant development plans and be prepared by a suitably qualified expert to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. When approved, the amended wind impact assessment will be endorsed and will form part of the permit. The provisions, recommendations and requirements of the endorsed wind impact assessment must be implemented and complied with to the satisfaction of the responsible authority.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. So what we have before us is a multi-storey building with retail on the ground floor, a residential hotel and residential dwellings. Now, this development has come before council on a number of occasions. Initially on the 23rd of February, where it was council issued a notice of decision to grant a permit for a development. VCAT subsequently issued an amended permit on the 21st of July 2016. There was a Section 72 amendment which was refused by council on the 9th of June in 2020. The applicant appealed this decision to VCAT, which was subsequently struck out and has since been pursued through the Supreme Court with a hearing to commence in October. Before us is a separate Section 87A amendment, which is pursued through VCAT. Now, whilst I still think the scale of this development is not acceptable, tonight we unfortunately aren't in a position to make a decision on the development as a whole, but to provide our position on the proposed amendments to this development. On the whole, the amendments are favourable with a reduced overall height and a better design outcome. So for that reason, I'm supportive of the officer's recommendation. However, I did want to include, and did want to add to the Condition 4 that any wind assessments that are completed are to take into consideration the proposed designs for the development at 8 to 24 Everidge Street. I think we need to do all that we can to prevent MPAC becoming a wind tunnel like the Docklands. And so any foresight that we can deliver or any amendments that we can make to reduce the impacts of winds for pedestrians, I think is worth doing. Nothing further to add on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Hodgson, would you like to speak to this motion?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Bedio. As Councillor Bedio has indicated, this one has a long history, and I too have concerns over the size and scale of it. But as Councillor Bedio has outlined, we're not really in a position to be able to discuss that tonight. The latest application seeks to change the original permit to have the ground floor used as retail and including a reception area for the 4 levels of the residential hotel. It also includes office space on the first floor, which doesn't appear in the original permit, and the rest being private dwellings. So if I'm looking for some positives on this application, the new application, it also changes the front street face to Mount Alexander Road from being curved to being straight, and the Heritage Officer's recommendation there was that it is actually a favourable outcome because it increases the views to the adjacent heritage building from Mount Alexander Road. The mixed use inclusion of office space is also a positive outcome because being in the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre, I know that office space will be of a premium. And I hope that the inclusion of some residential hotel space, limited, can have a positive outcome for the area as well, providing some tourism opportunities. The internal changes also include updates to the private dwellings, including a change to the mix of housing on offer and deleting the 3-bedroom apartments. I was somewhat concerned about this, but I understand that the current market process for selling off the plans is that apartments are designed in a way to provide some flexibility, so that should buyers wish to have an apartment with increased number of bedrooms, then that flexibility can be built in. Hopefully in that way the development can contribute a net benefit to the community by increasing the housing stock and diversity of housing stock that we have available. So we've got real concerns about the built form of the building. It sits really prominently at one of the key entrances to the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre, but given that the application doesn't really seek to increase the building's footprint or height, in fact it is a few metres lower, we don't really have any grounds to object on that basis. What we can do is try and address some of the concerns that recent development in Moonee Ponds has highlighted needs careful attention, and the conditions in the notice of decision do aim to mitigate that, including Councillor Bettio's addition to the officer's recommendation. And I note one of the conditions is also to have the developers produce a green travel plan, which will be a good thing. I feel the need to highlight that the development doesn't meet the vision for the area we've just endorsed through the Impact Planning Scheme Amendment submission, but given that the scope of the decision we have to make is limited...
Councillor Hodgson, your time has expired.
Thank you. I've spoke about some of the positive outcomes. So.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? If not, Councillor Bettio, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Item 10.2 on the agenda is 69 to 69C Hotham Road and 24 Rutland Street, Niddrie, use and development of a childcare centre and a reduction to the car parking requirement. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Tyson.
I'd like to move an alternative to the officer's recommendation.
If you could read, please.
The proposed motion is that Council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to planning permit application number MV/279/2019 for the use and development of a childcare centre and a reduction to the car parking requirement at 69-69C Hotham Road and 24 Rutland Street, Niddrie, brackets, lots 1 to 6 on PS 309028 and lot 595 on LP 10509 on the following grounds. 1, the proposal fails to provide sufficient car parking as required under clause 52.06 brackets car parking of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and would exacerbate car parking problems in the surrounding area. 2, the proposal will cause adverse traffic and pedestrian safety impacts within the surrounding area and existing road network, which will be substantial and unreasonable. 3, the arrangements for the storage and collection of waste are inappropriate and will cause unacceptable amenity impacts on surrounding land. 4, the use and development will have an unreasonable impact on the amenity of the neighbouring dwellings at 26 and 26A Rutland Street, Niddrie, which would be surrounded by the proposal. And 5, the built form is excessive in scale and appearance and not in keeping with the surrounding residential context or neighbourhood character in accordance with the objectives of Clause 15 brackets built environment and heritage and Clause 32.08-13 brackets general residential zone of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne. Councillor Tyson, would you like to speak to the motion?
So the motion's in pretty plain English and relatively self-explanatory. I'd like to thank the residents and objectors who have contacted me about this. The initial proposal was before my term commenced on council, and I understand that Councillor Byrne and Councillor Sypek were involved in the process in 2019. For those who don't know the area, so at least from my experience on Hotham Road as a frequent flyer on the 475 bus, it's a street that's already quite choked by traffic, very difficult to find a park. It's also the one of the main entrances to the Valley Lake Estate, and residents have some real concerns about what this will mean for them with 90 cars coming in and out during peak hour. So I'd commend a refusal on this application on those grounds.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Councillor Byrne, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor, I will. And thank you, Councillor Tyson, for moving this refusal. As Councillor Tyson touched on, Councillor Sypek and I know a bit of this history back from 2019, so I might take us just do a little bit of the history tour. But so this application seeks approval for the use and development of the land at 69 to 69C Hotham Road and 24 Rutland Street, Nidri. So it's from one street all the way through to the back street for a double-storey childcare centre for 90 children operating from Monday to Friday, 6:30am till 6:30pm. It's an irregular shaped combination of properties, approximately 1,900 square metres, with a carve-out with actual houses on the Rutland Street side in the middle, which I'll touch on later. And there's the commercial buildings facing the Hotham Road side and residential on Rutland Street. So this application was advertised and 17 objections were initially received, and Councillor Sypek and I attended that consultation meeting way back in December 2019. Concerns were raised primarily in relation to the impacts of traffic and parking, pedestrian safety, off-site amenity impacts, and whether or not the site could in fact be used as a childcare centre. No resolution was achieved, however changes to the application were subsequently considered in response to some of the concerns relating to car parking and enrolment numbers. And it went back out to advertising, and an additional 5 objections were received and further submissions by the existing objectors. So there are some things that I like about this application. The proposed use of land as a childcare centre is actually consistent with the planning policy framework and the municipal planning strategy. The use of residential land for a childcare centre is encouraged by policy at both state and local level, and the scale of the proposed use is appropriate to its residential context as discussed throughout this report. However, obviously this application doesn't actually work in this particular area. So what I'm trying to say is, whilst I can understand a childcare centre can fit sometimes within residential streets, this one is a bit of a doozy. Thank you, Councillor Tyson, for putting up this refusal. The first thing I want to touch on is the car parking. It's not compliant, and as someone who attends childcare centres regularly, I know how busy even compliant car parks can be. So for the fact that they're going from a required 19 down to 16, which will more than likely be used for staff car parking, including a car stacker, which obviously has already been touched on with questions from the public, is irresponsible if we were to approve something which would effectively not actually have any parking for what I would say the people dropping off their children, which leads on to the adverse traffic and pedestrian safety concerns. And I have a real concern that if they're expecting that the spots that are going to be going in through Rutland Street will be used by the staff, then the few spots on Hotham Road that aren't actually being provided by the development are being used by some parents or guardians dropping their children off, then people will be parking on the other side of the road, which, as Councillor Tyson mentioned, is a bus route.
Councillor Byrne, your time
30
has expired.
seconds, please,
Granted,
Mayor.
30 seconds only.
Which will then have children under the age of 5 potentially crossing a really busy street, which just isn't appropriate. There's the impact on 26 and 28 Rutland Street, and I think that's an excessive built form and appearance, and I've run out of time, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Sypek.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm one in favour of childcare centres. I think we don't have enough of childcare centres in Moonee Valley. But as my colleagues said, this is probably not the most ideal place to have a childcare centre. If you have a look at this actual parcel of land, It's a group of old shops, old single-fronted shops, and when they were designed, when these roads were designed, when Nidri was designed, it wasn't designed to have multiple traffic movements throughout this area. It was designed for a drop in, grab your milk, grab your bread, grab your newspaper, and off you go. This wasn't designed for high volumes of traffic. I also have a problem. Look, as much as I like car stackers, I think car stackers work in car parks. Car stackers work great in commercial properties where they'll be quite utilised. But car stackers don't work in residential areas, and this is where the problem lies. With trying to get the car parking for the staff and getting getting that formula right, the solution was bringing in car stackers. I don't think car stackers work in a residential area. I don't think anybody would like to have a car stacker next to their place or next to their lounge room or next to their bedroom. And when these things fire off, they do make quite a bit of racket. But even with all the acoustic measures around them, has anyone ever been next to a car stacker when they turn them on? They're pretty noisy. I'm sure that there's some sound engineer out there that will tell us that, oh no, it's all fine, well-being, that you can live with a car stacker next door to your house, but I'm pretty sure that sound engineer doesn't live next to a car stacker himself. So I'm happy to support Councillor Tyson's notice to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? If not, Councillor Tyson, would you like to close?
Only to add and echo my colleagues' comments, essentially that this was a residential street that was never designed to be a main thoroughfare, and it is now, and let's not contribute to it.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Isa, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Tyson. Those against, Councillor Nation. That is carried. Item 10.3 is Amendment C200 Moon 2017 Heritage Study, Permanent Heritage Controls, Post-Panel Adoption and Approval. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Isa.
Just got to step out.
Oh, sorry. Councillor
wait,
Adams
please.
has earlier declared a conflict of interest, so we will wait for Councillor Adams to leave the chamber. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Isa.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move an alternative motion. I might read the whole thing, I think.
I think probably that would be appropriate.
So the motion is that Council resolves to A, adopt the following background documents. 1, Moonee Valley 2017 Heritage Study, Volume 1, Precinct and Precinct Extensions, Attachment 5. 2, Moonee Valley 2017 Heritage Study, Volume 2, Individual Place Methodology, Attachment 6. B, note the contents of this officer report regarding Moonee Valley Planning Scheme Amendment C200 Moon, including the panel report and the panel recommendations, Attachment 4, pursuant to Section 27 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. C, adopt Amendment C200 Moon in accordance with Section 29(1) of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 with the changes recommended by the Independent Planning Panel as per the panel report included in Attachment 4 and in accordance with the amendment documents included in Attachment 2, subject to the further changes as follows. Reclassify the heritage status of the following property from contributory to non-contributory within its precinct. It's number 1, the 10 Grandview Street, Moonee Ponds. So it's a bit unclear, but I think that was captured. Bullet point 2, remove HO 451 Brown Avenue and Morford Avenue, Ascot Vale, and consider the precinct in a future study. Bullet point 3, update map on page 99 of the 2017 Heritage Study Volume 1 to reflect 15 Grandview Street, Moonee Ponds as a proposed non-contributory place. Review and update Amendment C200 Moon documentation to ensure all statutory recommendations correctly reflect the 2017 Heritage Study before submission of the amendment to the Minister for Planning for approval. D, submit the adopted amendment C200 Moon to the Minister for Planning for approval in accordance with section 31(1) of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. E, instruct Council's Chief Executive Officer to finalise amendment C200 Moon in accordance with Council's resolution and make any administrative changes required to correct errors and grammatical changes, including to the 2017 Heritage Study. F, authorise Council's Chief Executive Officer to request the Planning Minister to remove interim heritage controls introduced through Amendment C201 Moon, brackets, and extended through Amendment C215 Moon, close brackets, to the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme once permanent controls are in place. G, notify all submitters to the public exhibition of Amendment C200 Moon of the Council's resolution to adopt Amendment C200 Moon. Moon, and submit Amendment C200 Moon to the Minister for Planning for approval. I think that's grammatically correct. H, request a further report be provided to Council on bullet point 1, measures being taken to make heritage advice clearer and more accessible for property owners, particularly those whose properties are included in this amendment. Bullet point 2, measures being taken to reduce the costs and delays associated with planning permits for properties in a heritage overlay. Bullet point 3, possible heritage grant programs for properties within heritage overlay areas. And bullet point 4, permit exemptions regarding fencing within the City of Moonee Valley permit exemption policy, heritage overlay precincts, April 2001. And I'm actually just going to add a bullet point I that doesn't seem to have been captured in the G, I'm afraid. A point I to update Council on the best means of notifying all properties affected by Amendment C200 Moon.
Best means.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Well done. A seconder for the motion, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Isa. I'd like to speak to the motion.
Thanks, Mayor. It's not only the culmination of a very big motion, it's the culmination of extensive work by officers and experts over many years. This is a very large amendment. There are over 2,000 property owners who've been part of this process, and it's been ongoing since 2014 in its various stages of consultation. And the process along the way has thrown up many different, some changes, some small errors, some larger changes, and there are some further smaller points that are being addressed in this motion tonight, and that Council, I'm asking my colleagues that we address these specific points before requesting the Minister's approval of this amendment. Obviously, the ultimate objective of all of this is to conserve the rich cultural or colonial cultural heritage properties in Moonee Valley, and there are many of them. And this is just part one of a gap study. We all know the beautiful homes around our area, and we all know that the preservation of those, in fact, enhances our lived environment. But the planning tool of heritage is a very serious and significant control, and it should only be used where precincts actually merit it through their cohesion and where properties have integrity. Now, to have heritage integrity, any alterations of a house that are visible to the street must be of the same quality and detail of the original so as not to change the veracity of the original property that we're seeking to protect. So if the front facade of a property in a precinct has been so significantly changed with alterations that are not in keeping with the original, it will have lost sufficient integrity and the purpose of the heritage overlay is undermined. Now, the panel process identified a number of properties for which this was the case, and where reconstruction works have simply removed or changed too much, and these include 15 Grandview Street, 330 Buckley Street. They're examples where changes to the property have rendered those properties actually not meritorious of the heritage overlay. It's not enough that a property looks pretty, or even that it looks like it was from a particular era, so it might look Victorian or Edwardian or even of a later era. It actually must be of cultural and aesthetic significance. It must be real and have a truthfulness to its heritage value. So there are several properties for which this very difficult question was put to the panel, and the panel in fact reached some puzzling conclusions on just two that I've identified in that alternative, and they are 10 Grandview Street and then the Brown and Avenue and Morford Avenue. With respect to 10 Grandview Street, and I've got the panel report in some of the large folders of reading that are involved in this particular item. With 10 Grandview Street, the panel agreed that what is on the site at the moment is not what was originally constructed there. And that's a direct quote from the panel report, that what we see on this site is not what was originally constructed. However, the panel then went on to say that to the uneducated eye, the property does not appear out of place. Now, heritage is not measured by the uneducated eye, it's measured by evidence and experts. So it was quite a curious and puzzling phrase from the panel, and I think it's worthy of us interrogating that further and questioning the conclusion that's been made there. The evidence put and the evidence that was put by the owner is that the facade of the property does not have that truthfulness that's required for a heritage overlay. And for that reason, 10 Grandview can be justifiably downgraded to a non-contributory home in that precinct. Now, I'm aware of my time running out there, Mayor. I might just need a little bit of an extension at the end of this if I...
extra minute granted.
Yeah, thank you. Brown Avenue is quite vexed, and further work is needed to understand whether features of many homes in that street are original or sufficiently restore original elements to a degree that get them to the threshold to merit heritage. Now, through this amendment, heritage is a new thing for 2,000 properties. It's unfamiliar. Clear information is needed, and it's needed for residents regarding what they can do, what permits are needed. People are not clear about whether they can renovate, how they can renovate, whether they can do internal works. And so the second last point of the motion really asks for a report on how we can make that information more accessible to people. Succinct and easy information needs to be available, and it's not currently available on our website in my view. Heritage overlays only protect the front contributory elements to a property, but to get specific information and advice from Moonee Valley Council at the moment unfortunately costs $157. People also wait weeks for pre-application discussions. We want people to want to have heritage overlays, but that won't happen if what it means is more time and more money. So we need to minimise the costs and delays for permit applications. Heritage is a stamp of great value. It makes precincts more valuable real estate. Heritage Victoria has studied property values and reached that conclusion. Moonee Valley has precincts and homes of very high heritage value, and we're seeking to protect these and make Moonee Valley an even more highly sought area where the stories of our past can live on.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Isa. Just in reiterating Councillor Isa's comments, I think there is great merit in the in C200, in that we do need to do as much as we can to protect our heritage precincts. We're so lucky in this municipality that we have such an array of beautiful houses and beautiful areas that are worth protecting. However, heritage controls are serious and they place significant implications on homeowners. And for that reason, we need to ensure that the houses that we apply these controls to are worthy of the heritage overlay. There are other overlays that we can employ as a council to protect our neighbourhood character overlay being one of them. Now, when looking specifically at Brown Street, Brown Avenue, I believe, we were presented by residents of the street that provided evidence contrary to what we read through the reports and the panel hearing. To me, that's been enough for me to question whether that precinct should be included within this amendment, and I do really believe that further work needs to be done before we were to apply that amendment or that overlay to that precinct. I'd also like to reinforce Councillor Isa's statements in that if we're going to be increasing our heritage overlays and our heritage properties so significantly, we need to do everything we can as a council to improve our resources so that residents, well, one, know they're going to be under a heritage overlay, but two, know what they need to do if they want to paint the front of their house, they want to change their fence. These are all things that a lot of people take for granted, but a lot of these rights will be essentially stripped from a lot of our property owners. So we need to do all that we can to, one, notify these residents, but then two, provide them with the facilities and the resources to know what they can and can't do. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm really excited to support this motion and again acknowledge the significant amount of work that's gone into this over many years. In preparing for tonight, I asked around about the state of heritage in local councils, and I think Moonee Valley should be really proud of the way that we've taken a proactive approach to protecting our local built heritage. I think the comments I heard were that too many times heritage reports are commissioned and then they languish without their recommendations being actioned. In 2014, Moonee Valley was given a report, the GAP study, and they were given with that an 8-year work plan to act to protect the properties and precincts that were identified. This amendment is the conclusion of the second phase of that work, and it's, as Councillor Isa has said, a really significant, a large amendment with protection recommended to, I think it's about 60 individual places, 18 precincts and 9 precinct extensions. There's been a full process, 123 submissions received to the exhibition of the amendment and referred to panel, and I want to thank all of those submitters, as I know that the panel also noted you really helped to make this a robust process and help the experts to refine conclusions and strengthen the amendment that we now have. The panel report also really commends the work of council and our consultants, in particular the methodology that was used, which in their report they describe as robust and independent, and that they consider that it forms a robust strategic basis for the amendment. I just wanted to note briefly in relation to the amendment that the majority of the errors, the majority of the changes are, as Councillor Isa said, errors in consistency that have been picked up, and I'm really pleased that we're able to address those here. But a couple of things I wanted to draw attention to in the findings of the panel report. The first point I wanted to highlight is, as Councillor Isa and Councillor Bedio have been referring to, the panel found that the property value and financial implications on residents is not relevant grounds for making a decision to apply an overlay, but it is really important that council consider strategies to minimise the burden that an overlay can create for property owners. So I'm really supportive of the addition of some measures there to receive a report and look at things, whether that's grant options for restoration work, streamlining application processes, expanding availability of heritage advice for our residents, and providing really clear guidelines for people who are living under a heritage overlay. The second point is that the submissions were made by a number of property owners whose properties have been identified as contributory to their precinct, that show that alterations have been made to those properties that are inconsistent with heritage guidelines. And I just wanted to make the point that that's considered acceptable and not a reason in every case to remove or downgrade a property from the overlay. The houses that we're seeking to protect are, for the most part, more than 100 years old.
Your time?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I'll just, at this
30
point...
seconds.
Yeah, thank you. The threshold that contributory houses have to meet is to maintain their integrity as a building that contributes to the precinct, and whether you can still read the original style. Its changes are significant enough to warrant the change to non-contributory status. A lot of those have been picked up. But if I may, Mayor, I just wanted to move an amendment to the motion.
Yes. If you could outline your amendment.
Thank you. So in point C of the motion, the second bullet point, I'd like to move that we strike out that second bullet point, which reads remove HO 451 Brown Avenue and Morford Avenue, Ascot Vale, and consider the precinct in a future study.
Thank you. So we've got an amendment on the floor moved by Councillor Hodgson, and it is the deletion of the second bullet point under C, so the deletion of remove HO 451 Brown Avenue and Morford Avenue, Ascot Vale, and consider the precinct in a future study. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Tyson. Now, Councillor Hodgson, you can now speak to your specific amendment. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. So as I've mentioned, the panel report found that our methodology for the process has been really robust and independent. The precinct was first identified in the 2014 GAP study for its significance to the history of the suburban growth of the city of Essendon during the land boom, through development sort of paused through the depression of the 1890s and later the interwar development. Now, I do note that Brown and Morford Avenues weren't specifically mentioned in the GAP study, but the later Stage 2 study found that this precinct did represent that historical theme, and the GAP study sought, that GAP study identified and sought to protect. So through the Stage 2 process, there's been a significant amount of work done to assess the properties and their status as contributory or non-contributory, and that has been rigorously tested through the panel process as it should be. I note that submitters' concerns that the process occurred during 2020 and COVID restrictions made consultation and engagement processes quite tricky. And again, I really want to thank submitters for their efforts to provide further detail and add to the rigour of the process. In moving the amendment to reinstate Brown Avenue and Morford Avenue precinct in the amendment, I just want to state that I believe the process has been really robust, and that the advice of Council's heritage experts and the panel of experts is that the street and the contributory properties are worthy of protection under the heritage overlay. I note that the panel report does say that this particularly Brown Avenue received, I think, the highest number of submissions to the panel, and that the submissions that we heard from residents most recently were also provided to the panel through that process and were tested and responded to by the experts. So the process has taken 4 years to date. I really do think that deferral of this to another multi-year process is not a desirable outcome for the heritage protection or for the residents involved. The interim protection controls on this precinct will expire when the amendment comes into, the permanent controls are in place. And I think that puts us at risk that the properties in this precinct may have their heritage significance compromised without further protections, and it may also negatively impact future heritage study processes. Further, I think that the work that we will receive through a report on how council might resource and support residents living under a heritage overlay might also help to address some of the concerns raised by submitters in this precinct. In particular, non-original aspects of houses, although they maintain integrity and are contributory, they are not strictly protected under the heritage overlay, as Councillor Rise has indicated. I hope that there's a way, if we can provide some clear resources and guidelines around heritage protection, that we can support all of our residents to navigate the heritage processes. But I really do think it's vital that we consider the rigour of the panel process, consider the experts' opinion on the information presented here, and support their findings.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Tyson, would you like to speak to the specific amendment?
I think the Deputy Mayor covered it very well, and I'll just echo the sentiment of listening to the experts.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Any other councillor wish to speak to this amendment? Councillor Isa.
Yeah, look, and as I referred to before, Brown Avenue is a really vexed issue for us, and one of the difficulties in the process is that the experts and the panel and the heritage advisor obviously are able to make assessments on what they see. They don't go inside properties. They obviously have a rich wealth of understanding of the fabric of properties, but they can only make an assessment on the basis of what they can see visually. In this process, there have been submissions put to the panel about some properties that have helped to clarify that what the experts are seeing may or may not be genuine or have that integrity that I spoke about before. Now, the experts, it's not for want of expertise, it's for want of evidence. So the quality of the expert assessment is actually sometimes only as good as the evidence that they have before them. And sometimes that evidence can only be produced by the people who live in the house or by people who have photographs. Sometimes planning permits aren't available from previous eras. So the expert assessment is only as good as the evidence, and in the case of Brown Avenue, what we've got are a number of submitters who made written submissions testifying to whether their properties had that degree of integrity. And through the panel process, one resident has done an absolutely sterling job of trying to compile all of that with no particular expertise of her own, just her passion for the subject matter and her area, and has put together as best she can the evidence to further substantiate or challenge the claims that are made. What I feel this street really needs is another appraisal with a further independent expert that can take the evidence that this wonderful resident has put together and take that on board with I guess the additional expertise that's required to sift through that and really make a careful assessment about these properties. We know that there are at least...
Time has expired. Just
sorry,
if you finish your sentence.
We know that there are at least 9 out of 37 properties that are already non-contributory. That's the 80% threshold. If there were another 7 properties that were non-contributory, it would fall below the precinct, or the Brown Avenue would fall below the 60% threshold requirement. In my mind, on the evidence that we've been provided with, I think that we can identify at least 6 properties, bringing it very, very close to that threshold, which is why I would like to see us, I'd like to see us give it that due further interrogation through the means that I suggested. Sorry, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? If not, Councillor Hodgson, would you like to close?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd just briefly like to say I agree, Councillor Isa, that we do rely, as I've said, on extra evidence being provided to add to that rigour. And in the case of Brown Avenue, I really do feel that opportunity was provided through the hard work of the residents who made submissions to Brown Avenue, as I noted, perhaps the highest number of submissions coming from that street. That the system therefore was able to work in the best way that it could, and it did in fact result in the downgrading of, I think it was at least one property on Brown Avenue, thanks to the submissions made by residents. So, yeah, I do think that the rigour and the robustness of the process is demonstrated through the findings here.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. So we'll put the specific amendment to the vote. All those in favour is Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Tyson. Those against, Councillor Bettio, Councillor Nation, Councillor Isa, Councillor Sypek. That amendment is lost on the casting vote of the Mayor. We now return to the motion. At this stage, Councillor Isa has spoken as mover, Councillor Bettio as seconder, and Councillor Hodgson. Does any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Sypek.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Heritage overlay, it's a double-bladed sword, this. Works for some, doesn't work for others. I want to take you back to a couple of years back. We have a perfect example of where heritage overlay just didn't work properly. It was called Roslyn Wedding Receptions in Napier Street. Now, this place looked like a heritage home, was a heritage home, smelt like a heritage home, even functioned like a heritage home, but it wasn't a heritage home. The only thing heritage about it was a ceiling rose. That's it. A ceiling rose was the only part of heritage. It was replicated so well that even the experts were fooled. Now, as Councillor Isa said, it's only based on the evidence given. And if it wasn't for some former councillors who knew about this place 30, 40 years ago, nobody would have known this. And it was just by sheer fortune that it was brought to our attention. I also take comment to what Councillor Isa said. It depends. Like, what was built there wasn't the original thing. How far back do you take heritage? I mean, if we took the history right back, we could be still talking about East Keilor being fruit orchards. You could be talking about having the Cox family still owning most of the land around here. Could be cattle stations, sheep stations around here. How far do you take back heritage? How far do you look at things like that? How far, like the evidence, the expertise? It's very, very objective. So I take this whole debate with caution. I take this whole debate with looking at with open eyes, and hopefully that this study will get it right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sypek. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Mayor. Whilst I agree with the majority of this, I'll start with saying how much work has gone into it from officers current and previous, and obviously to previous councillors, Murnong ward councillors from last term. And I really hope that this gets over the line at the final step. I'm quite disappointed that the Deputy Mayor's amendment didn't get up, because I feel like removing a whole precinct out of this study that has been through such a vigorous process, and we're not talking about people who didn't present to a panel, we are talking about people who presented to a panel of 3 with all of the information, and they gave the recommendation they did. I feel like it's really disappointing, and that we are removing that, because there would be people within that precinct and surrounding area who do like the heritage and would like to see the heritage stay in that area, and there's now going to be a gap opened, of which that area, if you've been given the, I suppose, the heads up that there might be something coming, if there's any plans to demolish or change the property, I feel like they could be coming before us. But it is what it is, and whilst I'm extremely appreciative of all of the work that has gone into it, and I would have very much liked to have supported the officer's recommendation as is, I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? If not, the amendment wasn't carried, so no right of reply for the mover of the amendment. That gives Councillor Isa a right of reply.
Just very quickly, because you were generous in giving me an extension before, Mayor, but just to respond to some points raised by Councillor Byrne. So the panel had quite a high number of submissions and did make note that they did sit for 11 days through COVID on Zoom. They did make note that they were not able to address all of the submissions in great depth, and that they focused on those who presented to them. So not all of the submissions for Brown Street were in fact interrogated in the panel report, only a handful of them. The other point I just wanted to make note of, Councillor Byrne, is that the motion is not abandoning Morford Avenue and Brown Avenue. It's just putting it to the second stage, which is already underway, the part 2 of this study. So my hope is that over the course of that heritage study, this particular precinct can be interrogated further. We can really work out which houses are non-contributory and which are contributory, and that we can deal with that at the next stage. And I would imagine that the residents are more familiar with heritage now too, and the process might be somewhat easier for everyone involved. But it's certainly not abandoning that precinct after all this work. It's just putting it to the stage 2.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Nation, Councillor Isa, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Sharp. That motion is carried. If someone could please get Councillor Councillor Adams. Apologies, Councillor Byrne, you're very much present. Councillors, item 10.4 on this evening's papers is Budget 2021-22. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Adams.
Mayor, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with an amendment adding an additional point D.
Yes, if you could read point D for us.
Allow council officers to make minor editing and typographical changes to the draft Revenue and Rating Plan 2021, in brackets attachment 2, as required.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Tyson. Councillor Adams, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This motion resolves to adopt in principle the draft budget and the draft Revenue and Rating Plan for 21-22. The Revenue and Rating Plan is a new requirement under the Local Government Act 2020's Integrated Strategic Planning and Reporting Framework. It is now a requirement for all Victorian councils to develop a medium-term plan for how council will generate income to deliver on the council plan, program and services and capital works commitments over a 4-year period. Both documents are drafts for 21-22, and council will be commencing a 28-day public consultation period with submissions encouraged, and this will conclude at 5 p.m. Friday the 28th of May 2021. The submissions will be considered at council to be held on Thursday the 10th of June at 2021, commencing at 6 p.m. To enable community consultation, the budget will be made available for public exhibition at the Civic Centre and on Council's website so that we can hear feedback from our community before we finalise the 21-22 budget. This budget has been incredibly difficult following a tough 2020. In addition to the obvious financial impacts of COVID-19, the decrease of the rates cap from 2% to 1.5% for the 21-22 budget cycle has reduced revenue projections over the medium term by approximately $5 million. During this same period, operating expenses are projected to increase above the 1.5% rate cap, and a substantial annual capital works program is proposed. These factors have placed enormous pressure on council's cash reserves, and as a group we have had to make some tough decisions to ensure sound financial management and long-term financial viability of council. While trying to balance service provision and capital works delivery, the budget process has been rigorous and challenging. Our community is growing at a rapid rate, our council assets require ongoing maintenance that are costly, and our needs as residents is constantly changing and evolving, so it is extremely challenging as a council to weigh up the competing needs of our community and the priorities that are identified so that we can proactively protect existing assets as well as invest in and deliver new assets that enhance our public spaces, including roads, footpaths, facilities, infrastructure, open spaces and sporting facilities. I'd also like to just highlight a couple of key projects in Buckley Ward, which include the construction of the Cross Keys playground, car park and recreation area, Aberfeldy Athletics track lighting upgrade, the construction of the Chris Lane Memorial Baseball Field, the planting of more trees, the BMX and MTB facilities, and continuing the Better Moves Around Schools program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Tyson, would you like to speak to the motion?
It's certainly been a gruelling last month, especially for the newer councillors who weren't familiar with the long late nights that we'd be spending here. But I think we've managed to settle on a really great draft budget, balancing, as Councillor Adams mentioned, sort of the financial difficulties that ratepayers and therefore our council have been in, but also making sure that we're rebuilding while COVID is still going on, but laying the foundation stones for the next 4 years to make sure that we're representing our community, we're getting the projects that we need done across both, in Rosehill Ward, we've got the completion of the East Keilor Leisure Centre, which is a fantastic program and very long overdue. A new pathway connecting Rosehill Park and Steel Creek, finishing that final link in that path, and also something I'm very proud of, and particularly referencing our meeting with the Keilor Road Niddrie traders, is getting stage 1 of that Niddrie Keilor Road precinct upgrade done. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the community as to what they want. We've kept in mind that there will be a lot of submissions hopefully over the next little while, and we're looking forward to getting the draft done so that we can get the final budget done. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Does any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mayor. As has been touched on by the previous speakers, this is a draft, and so I do urge people of Moonee Valley to please submit to our draft budget. As has also been mentioned, we spent many hours putting this together, and I think that we've done a pretty good job. But obviously, we get a lot of resident feedback in regards to what they want and particularly about what they want. We don't get a lot of resident feedback in terms of what they don't want. Last night there would have been people who may have seen a particular story on the news saying that we spend a lot of our money on staff wages, and I think, as we have said, we've come out quite strongly to say that we do offer a lot of services at Moonee Valley, and that's in this budget. We have childcare, we have kindergarten, we have aged care, We support, we have our library services, and these are really loved by our community, or at least I think they're loved by the community. If they're not loved by the community, by all means, let me know. But my understanding is that our community wants us to continue these services, and they want us to continue employing the staff to run these services. We're not talking about high up, cushy exec jobs. We're talking about on the ground staff that are actually helping our kids, or whoever it might be, our aged care, our residents. So yes, we do spend a lot, but by all means, we've got a draft budget. It's open. I feel like there's various news outlets that run a similar story every single year around this time, so it didn't really come to surprise. But we have many groups that advocate towards sporting things or climate change or various things, but if there's a group that want to advocate towards cutting something, by all means let me know, but I haven't heard of one yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Does any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Hodgson.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I'd reiterate, I also found our first year budget to be a very interesting but challenging experience as a new councillor. I think there are really critical services that our council is responsible for, and striking the right balance is really important. As I've navigated the process for the first time, I've learnt a lot. There are a lot of initiatives and ideas that at a community level I know are very popular and need to be considered for future funding. But one of the key messages from our council organisation is about deliverability. And I wanted to also note that we have to make sure we've got proper planning and due diligence for any and all projects that we do, large and small, and we need to be spending our budget wisely. So I think the draft budget strikes a good balance with this. We're looking after our existing assets and services through maintenance and renewals, but also building for the future with really exciting capital works projects, including, I note for Moonee Ward, the design of a Flemington library upgrade, which we received a state government grant of $1 million towards, which will be fantastic. We've got design in there for a new pavilion down at Maribyrnong Park, starting work in earnest on the Flemington hub, and across the city just continuing to implement design and construction on a number of master plans, including 2 parks, streetscapes, sporting precincts and community hubs. What I'd really like to see in our next budget is that we get stuck into a few more pieces of work that the community's flagged as important to us. And for me, what I've heard from people, that's around support for the essential services that we run, like our aged care, childcare and kindergarten, and also evidence-based decisions on climate action. What I've learnt from this budget process is that there's a lot of preparatory work that goes into getting stuck into projects like that, and I look forward to getting straight into that. The first step of that is the council plan. So once you're done making submissions to this draft budget, I encourage you to also get involved in the second phase of engagement for the council plan development. That's going to help to guide us as a council and be an invaluable resource when we come back to this budget process each time. So I look forward to hearing the budget submissions and feedback from the community for this year's budget as we shape up the draft and make sure we're doing the best we can to meet the needs of the community.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Does any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Isa.
Thanks, Mayor. The draft budget, absolutely, as Councillor Byrne and Councillor Hodgson have referred to, is a draft, and we are really inviting and wanting residents to make submissions over the next 4 weeks so that we know what other projects ought to be considered in this budget and what other planning, as Councillor Hodgson was referring to, what other planning we might need to do to make sure that we can respond to the projects that the community wants to see. And of course the council plan is another process that we need to undertake to help shape budgets over the following years. I consider this budget a little bit of a process of mopping up from the last council term. Many of the projects in this budget are things that have been ongoing over the past 4 years and they're in their final stages, or the design work has been done and now it's time to actually do the work. And there hasn't been a great deal of scope for new councillors to I guess, stamp our mark on this in any way, or to put the projects into this that we really came to council wanting to to fund. So this one is a bit of a legacy budget, mopping up some projects, and we're really wanting to make sure that the next council plan sets out our key priorities and the priorities of the community, so that in successive budgets we can fund those. And obviously climate change is at the forefront of many residents' minds, and it's the forefront of many councillors' minds as well. And I acknowledge that this budget doesn't address the challenge, although it may address the climate change that I feel I experience in this chamber each night, which is quite freezing. I apologise, I'm chattering a little bit here, I'm so cold. But in terms of addressing the emergency of climate change that we face globally, and the inescapable 2 degrees of warming that we look to be heading towards without action, this budget, I acknowledge, doesn't take the actions that I hope that we are able to take in future years. Do note, though, that this budget does map out the serious predicament we do have across the next 4 years. COVID has challenged us, and without additional support from other levels of government, we're not going to be able to meet our goals as a local government. Also note that of our staff costs that Councillor Byrne was referring to, 60% of our staff costs are in service delivery. And I think that's testament to, I guess, the money that does go into that particular sector from Moonee Valley. So hopefully, please make submissions. We look forward to responding to them after a month. And hopefully, with the council plan, we can make more of an impact on climate change next year.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? If not, Councillor Adams, would you like to close?
Nothing further to add, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.5 is response to notice of motion 2020-26 soccer strategy. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Alternative, Mayor.
You could present that, please.
Thank you. Motion is that Council resolves to A, note the football in Moonee Valley discussion paper. Point B, allocate $50,000 in the 21-22 operational budget to fund the external development of a soccer strategy by 31st of December 2021, which looks at 1, participation analysis and demand projections through detailed club consultation, particularly considering the impact of COVID-19 on clubs with the aim of future-proofing the sport. Point 2, current infrastructure requirements and future requirements, including detailed discussion exploring future infrastructure ideas, including creating a soccer hub, turf ground conversion to artificial surfaces and redesigning rectangular fields with indicative costings. It says coatings in that, but that's just a typo, costings. Point C, develop a sports field allocation policy by 31st July 2021, which provides for and is not limited to, point 1, longer allocations for soccer clubs with the standard summer-winter seasonal allocations no longer applying. Point 2, soccer clubs having year-round access to pavilions, possibly to be determined based on the size of the club, whilst continuing to allow access to change rooms by cricket clubs during their summer season. Point 3, formulate a more robust process when determining allocations having regard to fixturing and team numbers of clubs, all codes in brackets, to ensure said numbers are not inflated in order to gain more allocation than what is needed. There's another typo there, than what is needed, what is required. Point 4, Council to provide the required access to grounds for the NPL junior season and will ensure all other requirements are met. Point D, where change rooms are adjacent to a community centre, formulate a policy to enable the soccer club's use of the social space within the centre by 31st of December 2021. And point E, conduct a thorough investigation into summer allocations, including but not limited to reviewing team numbers, fixturing, and the number of grounds allocated per club to be completed by 30th of August 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sypek. Councillor Sharp, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. This last month has pretty much all been about soccer, and I'm glad that tonight we can actually endorse the development of a soccer strategy which has come about from my notice of motion late last year. My alternative motion is pretty self-explanatory. I would like to see the strategy focus on demand projections, participation analysis, and importantly, infrastructure requirements now and into the future. This is what the soccer strategy will effectively encompass. Alongside the strategy, we have spoken about the development of a sports field allocation policy, and it is noted in the report that the way we currently process allocations on a winter/summer basis does not work for soccer. Noted in the report is also a reference to the other major concerns of clubs. So my alternative seeks to provide guidance for the development of an allocation policy and includes a reference to longer allocations and access to pavilions, noting most importantly that summer access to change rooms for summer tenants is to be provided. Now, I'm entirely confident that we will develop a policy that does not dislodge any other code. It just needs forethought, consideration, and a little bit of thinking outside the box. Codes generally play at home one week and away the next. With a reference to fixturing, we can actually maximise usage quite easily whilst ensuring all codes and their members can continue to play the sports that they love. Other councils do it, and so can we. We only need to look at adjacent and nearby municipalities to see how they manage soccer clubs very effectively. We talk about maximising the utilisation of our infrastructure in MB 2040. So far, we haven't done a great job of that, and some of our pavilions are left dormant for 6 months of the year. These pavilions could be used by our soccer clubs and in turn our residents who are members of these clubs who already have a home base there, but still continue to share the ground and change rooms with cricket clubs over the summer months. It can be done. Our soccer clubs are the only ones who have to entirely vacate their homes every 6 months. They are told to take every single item with them. This means that they can't display any championship cups, FFA cups, flags, banners, life member boards, nothing. They take every single item with them, only for the pavilion to remain vacant. I'm not sure if any other councillor has ever walked into one of our footy clubs and not seen premiership cups, flags and life member boards going back to the 1960s. I'm sure none of us have, because the footy clubs have proper homes that they can access 12 months of the year and aren't told to get all of their items and leave every 6 months. I'm not sure, well, I certainly can imagine the uproar if we did that. So why would we impose this on our soccer clubs? Now, this is certainly not about soccer versus footy or soccer versus cricket. It's highlighting the disparity in how we currently manage our codes in Moonee Valley. We have baseball, which has access all year round to their pavilions and grounds, and a number of other sports that I could mention. Surprisingly, although we have applied winter/summer allocations over the past number of years, with it being noted that winter is soccer and summer is cricket, we do have a winter cricket allocation at least 2 of our grounds, and 1 club has year-round access to their clubhouse. Again, I have no issue with this at all. I just need to highlight the disparity between how we have been managing our various codes. If soccer clubs had longer access and home bases, their reliance on other grounds such as Fairbairn and other overspilled grounds will be reduced, thus allowing for other codes to use these grounds. There really is no disadvantage to any code or club by endorsing this alternative. All of our soccer clubs are watching tonight, and all they want to do is get on with providing our kids, our men and our women with the ability to play the sport that they love. We can solve the issues before us, and we can show our soccer clubs that we support their code through the endorsement of this soccer strategy and a more sound allocation policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. As we all know, Moonee Valley is a landlocked council. We can't build new soccer pitches, new football pitches, new tennis courts, new basketball courts. We don't have that space. We can't even build double-storey football fields, Mr Mayor. It's physically impossible. Maybe sometime in the future with engineering, maybe we can do it one day. I don't know. But we have to really think about how we've been doing allocations, and we now have to look at a different way to try and maximise every single one of our facilities and not leave anything dormant for 6 months. Don't leave anything dormant for at least 2 weeks, whatever. We really have to now look at how we can utilise every single one of our sporting areas. This needs to be really, really looked at carefully. I think what Councillor Sharp's proposed is a good idea. It's asking to look at this, not only just soccer, but to look at all codes. And I can only go by my own experience. When my children were small, they played football and they played cricket. And they predominantly, were playing 2 sports at the same time for about 3 months. So we were at training at cricket for 2 nights a week, training at football for 3 nights a week. It happened in that overspill of time. And as local level sports gets a bit more sort of professional, I remember 20 years ago, pre-season was never an issue for local sports. Now it is. Some of our clubs we should be proud of, especially some of our soccer clubs. We've got 2 NPL sides. Not many councils in Victoria can boast to have 2 NPL sides. Not to mention that our other soccer clubs are not high in their rankings as well. So I fully commend what Councillor Sharp's trying to do here, and I think we just need to reset, rethink on how we look at sports and how we look at when they play, how they play, what they play. We really, really need to have an open mind about this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Isa?
Mayor, firstly, I'd just like to foreshadow the officer's recommendation, potentially with a further amendment, just as a first step. Secondly, I'd just like to move an amendment, point F, or actually I think I could move it to B.2, or B.3, sorry, if I make it B.3. I think that's where it would fit best. Which looks at 3, the impact of any recommendations / outcomes to other open space users / sports in Moonee Valley.
And that pertains to the soccer strategy, which would look at...
That's right. So it's actually...
Pertains to the soccer strategy.
Yeah, it's lifting point D of the officer's recommendation and just moving that into B3.
Yep, that's fine. Do you want to just pop over to Dario? Meeting's still in process, councillors, so please don't speak.
That was worth doing just for the jacket.
All right, so the amendment on the floor is the addition under B, point 3, impact of any recommendations / outcomes to other open space uses, sports in Moonee Valley. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Isa, would you like to just speak to this specific amendment, please?
I'm just speaking to the amendment.
Yes.
Do I get a chance then to speak? Yeah, okay.
Yes, you'll get another
just speaking to the amendment, just that I think this is a very important part of the officer's recommendation. B captures a lot of the officer's recommendation, but I think this is a very important part that dropped off. Obviously, none of our codes operate in isolation, and none of our grounds are used solely by, they're open space users of all of our grounds, and any strategy does need to touch on what the recommendations or outcomes might mean for other users of open space, whether they be people playing in the park, walking their dog, or other sports codes. So I think that's a really important part of any strategy that we are putting forward.
Thank you, Councillor Isaac. Councillor Hodgson, would you like to speak to the specific amendment?
Thanks, Councillor Nation. And I do note that in speaking to the her motion, Councillor Sharp did note that nothing was intended to dislodge anyone, and so hopefully that this amendment will meet what Councillor Sharp was trying to achieve as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't support the amendment put forward, namely because what we're seeking to achieve here is to have an external provider look at the development or develop a soccer strategy for council. That soccer strategy is wholly and solely looking at the demand projections. They're based on soccer club consultation and the potential infrastructure requirements, including future ideas, and I would be loath to suggest that an independent body who is looking purely at soccer should be charged with the task to also evaluate what happens in other aspects to our open space regarding open space uses and sports in Moonee Valley. I would suggest that would be something that council would touch on, or council would assess once we get the soccer strategy back and we can all have a good look at it and understand what it means. None of us around this table are silly, so I'm quite sure that we are all quite capable of reading a document that relates to a soccer strategy and understanding what the impacts might be, but I do not agree that should be the focus or the direction for an external body that has been charged with developing an actual soccer strategy for us.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? If not, Councillor Isa, would you like to close?
Take the point that the strategy does want to be quite detailed about soccer, and I think that's understood. I guess the reality is that there needs to be a holistic understanding of how recommendations, what the consequences or the impacts of that might be for others. And it's not suggesting detailed impacts, but just having a holistic understanding and looking at that with a lens that then council will need to bring to that. And I think it is quite an important part of any strategy that we do develop.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. I'm putting this specific amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Nation, Councillor Isa, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek. So this amendment is carried. Now, Councillor Isa, I'd given you the call, but you'd only foreshadowed and moved the amendment. So if you would like to speak to the substantive motion.
Generally, part B of the substantive motion does replicate to a large extent the officer's recommendation. Part C does raise considerable concerns, and I do note that the date there, the 31st of July 2001, doesn't align with the date of the motion that was moved at the meeting on the 13th of April, where the motion did outline, I think it was the 15th of August, for the same field allocation policy. So I don't know if that's a problem. I just am flagging that. C obviously sets out some specifically prescriptive features of what this policy might provide. And I think the point of seeking so that it actually sets out a policy in C and prescribes elements of that policy in 1, 2, 3 and 4. And I guess I have considerable concerns with development of policy in this way. To develop policy, we need to request an exploration of a particular topic and seek some expert officer advice on particular elements of that and seek a report and then work through that process. The way I'm reading C, it's actually prescribing what the policy ought be without that discursive and without an approach to it that draws on some research and us then reflecting on that. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm not quite sure I quite understand the intent of D. I might just need to read that again. And E, I'm not quite sure I understand the intent of D or E, I'm afraid. I'll just listen to what anyone else has
Any
to
clarification,
Tyson,
Mayor?
yes.
Has Councillor Isa foreshadowed the officer's recommendations should this motion fail,
Correct.
as well as amending the motion? Okay.
The
thank you.
amendment's been moved and carried and now forms part of the substantive. Councillor Isa has flagged she's foreshadowed the officer's recommendation as well.
So, a point of clarification for the audience out there. So, what's happened is Councillor Sharp's alternative is still the substantive motion with Councillor Isa's slight amendment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Exactly as you said. That is. Councillor Isa, the clock has stopped, so you have 2.5 minutes to continue. Done. Thank you, Councillor Isa. At this stage, for the substantive, got Councillor Sharp as mover, Councillor Sypek as seconder, Councillor Isa has spoken. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor...
Can I ask a point of clarification? Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Hobson.
Through the mover, I think, can I ask Councillor Sharp, did you seek any advice from officers about the time frame in point B of a soccer strategy being developed by the 31st of December 2021?
So clarification, Councillor Sharp, is did you seek officer feedback on the 31st of December 2021 time frame?
Not today. No, I did not.
Confirmed. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Bedio, you had the call.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have concerns that potentially we're putting the horse before the cart in a way with this. We're saying that we're going to develop... I must say I do fully support the soccer strategy. I support a new sporting field allocation policy, but I'm just looking at the dates. So in my mind, the soccer strategy should inform the sports field allocation policy, being if the suggestions from that report could potentially then advise officers on the best way to allocate our sporting fields, potentially by setting the allocation policy before we receive the soccer strategy back. That seems to me a little bit back to front.
Mayor, can I move an amendment, please?
Yes, it's a procedural motion. You can, yes. Councillor Bedio, your time is noted. You will hear the amendment. You still have 2:12 when substantive resumes, if possible. Councillor Byrne, what's your amendment?
Apologies, Councillor Bedio, for coming in, but I think this might clarify things. I'd like to delete point B, C, D and E and add in a new point B reading, note the Moonee Valley Soccer Future Directions Plan 2012 and receive a report back on progress of the plan.
Right, okay. So, just if you could get those words potentially over to governance, noting you do have a baby, governance may... Oh, okay, they're just emailed. So, councillors, at the moment before us, we have a motion to move an amendment from Councillor Byrne. The amendment is the deletion of the substantive motion before us of B, C, D and E, and the addition of point B, note the Moonee Valley Soccer Future Directions Plan 2012 and receive a report back on the progress of the plan. Councillors, unless there's any questions on that, if everyone's aware of what the amendment is on the floor, I will ask for a seconder for Councillor Byrne's amendment. Councillor Tyson. We have a live amendment on the floor. Councillor Byrne, if you could speak to your specific amendment.
Thank you, Mayor. Throughout the week, councillors were first made aware of a newspaper article that referenced a soccer strategy, and it was a soccer strategy that it predated me from being on council, and I wasn't aware of it, and it was completed in 2012, and my understanding it would cost in the vicinity of $50,000. After 2012, I'm not exactly sure what happened to it, but it hasn't come up in any of our previous papers. And I'm actually not necessarily against what is in Councillor Sharp's substantive motion. However, I feel like so much of the discussion at the moment is talking about let's get a plan in place, but then there's let's get a plan in place, but let's also do these in the meantime. Whereas I think the logical approach would actually be, hey, we've got a plan. What about we go back to what we spent so much money on doing in 2012 and see where we actually sit with it? I completely understand that there'll be some things that we've done, some things that we might be going to do, and some things that we realistically can't do anymore. But that's okay. But I think in terms of what we're doing as representing the ratepayer, as a ratepayer, I would be absolutely furious to know that we have actually got an endorsed soccer strategy and we're not using it, and we're going out and spending potentially another $50,000 on developing one, when we could at least get the report back on the one that was done in 2012, and then from there might be the progression of the next soccer football plan. In terms of the horse cart bolting, I always get that saying wrong, but I know what you were saying, Jacob, and I feel like we're absolutely doing that with some of this. I feel like this new motion just clears things up. We're noting the discussion paper that was done really recently, and we're going back and referring to a really detailed, I'm talking over 30-page plus appendices document that has been sitting in the cupboard. As a councillor, I couldn't even find it. I had to ring up the company who was commissioned to do it to be able to get hold of it. So to say that, and I did circulate it to councillors, and I'm sure community members might want to have it as well, but I only came in contact with it maybe an hour before the meeting. So I feel like let's just do this properly, see what we've already got, and work from there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Councillor Tyson, do you wish to speak to this specific amendment?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just noting the change that Councillor Byrne has made. I had a quick look through this earlier, and it was endorsed back in 2012. So many things have changed. There's a list of things in order to be done here, and it refers to the pavilion being built at Strathnava back in 13-14. It talks about review allocation policies. It talks about change rooms adjacent to community centres. It actually talks about a number of things being picked up in my motion, but the information, noting that it is a report that was, a study that was endorsed by council so long ago, most of the information in this is completely irrelevant. There's a page here that talks about ground use. No grounds were available for pre-season training in Moonee Valley last year. In most instances, we understand this is due to the allocation by summer season sport codes and council's desire to preserve the grounds for the home and away season. There's talk here about cross keys being withdrawn because of a proposal from Melbourne Storm to develop a major facility there. the information, whilst I understand the sentiment by Councillor Byrne, the information and the notes and the planned outcomes for this directions plan back from 2012 is completely and utterly outdated. We've had an expansion within our soccer clubs of members, let alone female players, and this report says that Moonee Valley is certainly doesn't have anywhere near the required levels of female soccer players, whereas now we do. So I'm very, very loath to go back and, essentially try and reinvent the wheel when my notice of motion was endorsed in December last year to go out to do a soccer strategy. And it's no good basing any new strategy on demographic profiles, talking about the number of players that actually are involved in soccer in Moonee Valley when the trends that are noted in this report are completely and utterly outdated. I am, to talk about just what was said before regarding the allocation policy versus the soccer strategy. If you've had a look at the Melton Council soccer strategy that was endorsed last year, that refers all to infrastructure and the like, and not the allocations.
Excuse me, Mayor.
So,
Yeah, so we're just talking. Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
I'd like to move that the motion be put.
Can you give me the governance rule?
Clause 46.4.3.
So this would actually not enable you to do so, because a procedural motion may be moved by any councillor who has not moved or seconded the original motion. Now, in this context, we're talking about the original motion being the amendment. Would that be a correct interpretation?
No, the original motion would have been the original motion by Councillor Sharp.
Original motion moved by Councillor Sharp. All right. So, Councillor Tyson. So, 46.3, the procedural motion may be moved by any councillor that has not moved or seconded the original motion or otherwise spoken to the original motion. And then which particular procedural motion, if you could quote?
46.4.3, that the motion now be put.
So 46.4.3, procedural motion for closure. That motion now be put. So A, debate is not permitted. B, may be raised at any time except for during nominations for chair. C, the effect of the motion is carried as the original motion is put to the vote immediately without further debate. So I believe, governance, I need to take a vote on this. All right. Do I need a seconder for procedural motion? I don't.
Point of clarification, Mr Mayor. Does that mean councillors who haven't spoken to Councillor Byrne's motion are being now gagged, like me?
Sorry, I can't deal with that point of clarification because it's subjective.
yes.
But am I being gagged?
Yes, you are, Councillor
Councillor
Sypek.
Sypek, it's, the point of clarification is subjective, so I can't answer that correctly. I'm just seeking
You are.
governance advice.
Am I allowed to speak before the vote's taken?
No, not if we've got a procedural motion that I've got to deal with. So I believe at this stage I'll need to take a vote on the.
So this is a deliberate attempt to gag me.
Councillor Sypek,
Gagging all councillors, Councillor Sypek.
If you don't have the call, councillors, we have a procedural motion. So the procedural motion is that the motion now be put in regards to this particular amendment before us. That this is voting on the procedural motion only if we're going to allow it. I don't need a seconder. Those in favour of this amendment being put? Councillor Tyson. Those not in favour of the amendment being put? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Nation, Councillor Isa, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek. That procedural motion is lost. Now, Councillor Sharp, you may continue. Councillor Isa.
Sorry, just before Councillor Tyson moved the motion, I was just going to, I don't have the rules in front of me, Mayor, but I was just going to ask if the debate could be contained to the amendment. It was referring to the...
So, Councillor Isa, given this specific amendment deletes the entirety, almost entirety of the motion, then I think it is within Councillor Sharp's right to be able to speak to the deletion of it, given I think that's fair. Councillor Sharp, if you could continue.
Thank you. As I was referring to a soccer strategy that was done recently by another council, the soccer strategy is referring to infrastructure, demand projections and the like. This allocation policy is a policy that is within council's remit. It does not rely on what the soccer strategy will tell us.
Councillor Sharp, that's your time. If you could finish your sentence.
It can't be.
Yeah, no, it actually is. The clock did stop at 13 when the procedural motion was called for this amendment.
I'll finish my sentence.
Please.
The sports field allocation policy is something that is within council's remit, and it is an issue that it's a massive issue with clubs, and we have the ability right now to be able to show our clubs that we support them and that we understand that their concerns that have already been flagged in the directions paper, the background paper. We have the ability to change this, and we can.
Sharp.
And we can.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? If not, all right. Don't leave it to the last. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I suppose I just wanted to say in support of this amendment that the discussion paper doesn't directly address anything out of the future direction soccer plan. I note Councillor Sharp's indication that on a quick read of it, and I must confess I've only had a chance to get through the first couple of pages, but that there are a lot of things which have been implemented from the 2012 report, which I think is a good thing, but note that there are a few things in there that I think have formed part of the conversation. I note in the recommendations that there is a point 10 to encourage, a point that looks at talking to schools, and also a point around seeking to provide access for clubs adjacent community facilities, which is precisely something in Councillor Sharp's original motion. So there are definitely aspects of this report that I think we could pick up on, and I'd be keen to hear a report back before we progressed any further with development of a future soccer strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson.
Point of clarification, if I may, Mayor.
Clarification, Councillor Bedio.
Through to the Director of Strategy and Planning. The development of a sports field allocation policy, was that development already triggered through a motion last council meeting?
So you are asking if the development of a sports field allocation policy...
Was that development triggered as per the a motion last council meeting? I can't remember the exact motion that it was.
Through the CEO, I'll get the director to answer, and I will permit it, given that this amendment, again, is discussing the deletion of 4 points in which that sports field allocation is referenced, so I consider it relevant to this particular amendment.
Through you, Mayor. Last meeting, there was a resolution that a soccer strategy was a sporting field allocation policy was to be a report back to council for the 15th of August regarding a allocation policy, so it does cover similar ground.
Thank you. Mr. Walters. Councillor Bedio, that answers your point of clarification.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Hodgson, you'd finished speaking. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? Councillor Isa.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Bedio, because I was just going to make a couple of brief points, and the first was going to be that, yes, under point E at our meeting last time on the 13th of April, it says consider the Royals proposal as part of the sporting field allocation policy to be developed by council and the report to come to us. So at the same meeting, point D says consider the club's feedback and proposals provided as part of the council's pending council's consideration to develop a municipal soccer strategy. So as part of the same motion last meeting, there's still a resolution that council will be developing a soccer strategy. So I'm just not quite sure if that butts up against B, or if we perhaps receive a report back on the progress of the plan. The soccer strategy is still pending per last council meeting, so I'm not quite sure how that's impacted by this amendment. But I do note, just my final point I just wanted to make was I have had a chance to have quite a considerable read of the 2012 soccer strategy, and it's a very informative, very detailed document that lists quite an extensive and creative list of recommendations. I would very much like to know how those recommendations have progressed. And also it does give us an historical overview of the progression of soccer in Moonee Valley, which is incredibly valuable as we look forward to future projections, and in terms of how infrastructure might have served us previously, and then what future projections. It just gives us a more comprehensive and forward-looking as well as historically informed outlook. So I think I do support the amendment. I just need to work out how that sits against last council meeting's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? Councillor Sypek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, I sit here a little bit perplexed to this amendment because to me this looks more like an alternative. I would have thought that it would have been more prudent to vote on what the amendment was, or sorry, the alternative that Councillor Sharp put up with the amendment that Councillor Isa put up. Voted on that. If that failed, then we could have gone to something else. But this is a wholesale
Point
change.
of order, Mayor.
It's a point of order.
The debate must be relevant to the motion. Councillor
His
Sypek
statement
is...
let me deal with the point of order. What was the statement that Councillor Sypek made that was not relevant?
that this amendment, that it shouldn't be done this way?
I said it could be looked at.
I guess it's, I would rule that it's Councillor Sypek's opinion. It's a subjective statement, so I won't accept that point of order. Councillor Sypek, you may continue.
It's just, like I said, it's just my opinion that to me this is a completely different point of view to what the actual original alternative that Councillor Sharp put up. But if this is what we've got, this is what we've got to vote on. I, for one, was around when this soccer strategy came on board, and a lot has changed since 2012. And yes, it's good to reflect, like Councillor Isa said, on what we've got here, but it's also good to use this as a part of a new soccer strategy. I, for one, am very, very keen to see a soccer strategy come to Moonee Valley. Not only soccer, but we're going to have the same problems in football, the same problems in cricket. We're going to have basketball. We're going to need a basketball strategy here, ladies and gentlemen, as well. So let's not just, cut our nose off to spite our face, because I think this is what we're doing here right now. I really think we should think this thoroughly through. Let's have a soccer strategy. Let's have an AFL strategy. Let's have a cricket strategy. Let's have a basketball strategy. We need strategies for all sports because, like I said, we are a landlocked council. We really have to think about how we utilise every one of our facilities. And I think by trying to put up blockers and put up road humps like this, I don't think is a good idea. We really need to look at having a proper strategy for predominantly all of our sports.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? If not, Councillor Byrne, would you like to close?
Yes, please. So firstly, Councillor Sypek, you're talking about how much we need a strategy, and we've got one. But that's what the whole amendment's about, is that we've got a strategy, so let's actually look at it and refer to it and digest it. I completely agree that we need a soccer strategy, but we've got one. So I'm not really sure. And yes, sure, we can update it and we can look into what's done and what's not and grow from there. We spend so much money on these things and then don't use them. It's quite perplexing. One thing that was brought up at a point was that so much of this strategy has already been done, and if the strategy was done in 2012 and we hadn't done anything, I'd be bitterly disappointed, because it would have been a complete and utter waste. So it is great that as a council we have contributed a lot to soccer in the municipality over the past 10 years. It is somewhat surprising that there was as I said, I wasn't aware of this strategy. I'm mindful, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek, you were on council when this strategy would have been endorsed, and by all means, please correct me if I'm wrong. And yet this hasn't been brought up beforehand. I feel like that's really unfortunate, because there's some brilliant information in this. Admittingly that, yes, Councillor Sharp, some of the data and whatnot might be dated, but we can still grow from it. But we have a really, really good detailed strategy that the majority of councillors around this table have not seen, but that may have first seen this report some 3 hours ago. And I think we owe it to everyone to at least take time to read it, digest it, and have a report come back which can go through what has been done, what needs to be done, what can't be done, and future strategies from there. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. I'm putting this specific amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Adams, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Isa, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Bedio, Councillor Nation, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek. That amendment is carried and now becomes the substantive. So at this stage, with the substantive, I've got Councillor Sharp as the mover, Councillor Sypek as the seconder, Councillor Isa and Councillor Bedio. You have 2:12 left on the clock, if my notes are correct. If you may wish to... Councillor Tyson.
Mayor, point of order, clause 46.4.3. I move that the motion now be put.
Procedural motion, yes?
Yes.
And before I didn't deal with it correctly, I will need a seconder for that procedural motion. A seconder for the procedural motion, Councillor Byrne. So, councillors, we have a motion for a motion for closure, procedural motion for closure. Now, should this be successful, we will immediately move to vote on the substantive. So this is voting to accept procedural motion of closure. Those in favour? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Nation, Councillor Isa, Councillor Sypek. That procedural motion is lost. Councillor Bedio, you have 2 minutes 10 left on the clock to continue talking to the substantive.
I get to speak now. I'd like to move an amendment, if I may.
Bear with me, 1:57 on the clock, thank you. All right, so, Councillor Bedio, you're moving an amendment.
An amendment to add a Part C to this current substantive, following the report back on the progress of the 2012 plan, as per Part B, consider progressing a new municipal soccer strategy that is informed by the report.
Councillor Bedio, could you please just confirm that the words on the screen?
No, in plan per B, not C, following the report back on the progress. Yep, perfect.
So, councillors, we have an amendment on the floor. It's the addition of point C, following the report back on the progress. C, following the report back on the progress of the 2012 plan per B, consider progressing a new municipal soccer strategy that is informed by the report. Moved, Councillor Bedio. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sobek, you can't because you're the seconder of the original motion. Governance says no. Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak to this specific amendment?
Look, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think... Sorry, is my microphone on? Yep.
Yes.
Whilst I obviously didn't vote for the prior amendment, I can see its merit in addressing and looking at the existing plan that we do have, but I would like to ensure that we do move forward on ensuring that we remain relevant and that we're addressing the needs of clubs at this time. So if the report back addresses things and that we have, there are ways for us to progress on our soccer strategy, that council can come back and consider addressing and developing a new soccer strategy, taking in the findings from the 2012 Future Directions Soccer Plan.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Hodgson, would you like to speak to this specific amendment?
Thanks, Mayor. Just really briefly, I think I was remiss in not thanking Councillor Byrne for her research into finding the report. And I think, as we've discussed already this evening, it's a really great basis from which we can grow and revise our strategy going forward. So I'm supportive of this.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? Councillor Isa.
Just thank you, Councillor Bedio. That addresses the concern that I had earlier about how this motion integrates with the resolution that was passed last meeting. So thank you for that.
Any other councillor wish to speak to this amendment? Councillor Sypek.
I speak on behalf of all sporting codes in Moonee Valley and thank Councillor Bedio for his wisdom and his kind words that we put up there. Predominantly what we've got here, Mr Mayor, is Councillor Sharp's original motion, but just condensed because we are now going to have a soccer strategy incorporating the information from the 2012 strategy, which will give us valuable information to produce the new soccer strategy. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Any other councillor wish to speak to this specific amendment? If not, Councillor Bedio, would you like to close? I'll put this specific amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Nation, Councillor Isa, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Sharp. So that amendment is carried. It becomes a substantive. At the moment, on the substantive, Councillor Sharp has spoken as the mover, Councillor Sypek as the seconder. Councillor Isa, Councillor Bedio, you have 1 minute 57 left on the clock. We'll make it an even 2 minutes. Councillor Bedio.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to put forward a procedural motion, if I may.
Yes.
Under Rule 34, I'd like to request that when it comes to the vote, that the vote be taken. Oh, no, sorry. Ignore that.
Okay, no procedural motion.
No.
Got 1 minute 54 on the clock.
It keeps changing. I'd like to put that. I'd like to move that the motion is put.
Oh, okay. So you are with a procedural motion. We got a procedural motion. The motion is put, or a motion for closure. A seconder for that motion, Councillor Tyson. So, councillors, we are voting on the procedural motion of closure, which, if carried, will proceed straight to a vote. All those in favour? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Isa, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Nation, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek. That procedural motion is lost. Back to the substantive. Councillor Bedio, you have 1 minute 51 remaining.
Nothing further to add, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Does any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? If not, I need to consider the 3 amendments, even if some have since been deleted. Councillor Isa, would you like a right of reply?
Not tonight, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Just thank you, Mayor. I think what's really important is we've spent a lot of time talking about soccer in Moonee Valley, and one thing that I think has been, you know, somewhat exciting is there's been a lot of talk about how we don't do anything for soccer, and I disagree with that. Obviously we can do more, and I'm not doubting that, but I look at the spend that we've had at Cross Keys and at Fairburn Park, and by looking through this future directions plan from 2012, one of the reasons why there might not be so many things that are relevant in it is because so much of it's actually done when you have a flick through it. So that's actually exciting, and I think that as a council we often look at the things that we don't do and don't necessarily highlight the things that we do. And we do a lot of things well, and Fairburn and Cross Keys are absolutely beautiful pavilions that we opened last council term. The grounds are magnificent. We're getting the lighting done, and yes, I'd like to click my fingers and make sure that every one of our soccer clubs had multiple pitches at the one venue and had absolutely everything, but we look at other sports, as Councillor Sypek mentioned before. Basketball, Aberfeldy Jets, they don't have a home, and they have 1,000 players, I believe, and they don't have anywhere in Moonee Valley to play. So whilst I agree we can do more for soccer, there are other sports that we have to consider as well. I really hope that soccer does grow in this municipality. Soccer's having a really, really rough trot at the time, and you just need to see what's been happening overseas with all the different types of leagues, what's been going on. But I'm thinking back to 2012, and in 2012, Melbourne Victory would be getting 45,000 supporters at a home match at a big game at the Telstra Dome or Etihad or whatever they...
Time, if you can finish your sentence.
Whereas now they're lucky to get 5,000, and that's unfortunately really disappointing for the sport, and I hope it doesn't reflect in the participants. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Mover of Amendment 3, Councillor Bedio, right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Just keep this brief. Well, hopefully, obviously this isn't the motion that I had hoped would have been put forward, but nevertheless this is where we are. Potentially by officers reviewing the 2012 report, we potentially might not have to reinvent the wheel. It may end up with better outcomes for a potential upcoming municipal soccer strategy that I still have hope for that we can commission at some point.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Sharp, mover of the original substantive, would you like a right of reply?
Well, after effectively being tried to be gagged 3 times, yeah, right of reply is really good, Mayor. Thank you very much. So we've got a motion in front of us that effectively delays looks at a report from 2012 with invalid information and delays the report of a soccer strategy coming back to us because no money's allocated. And the notice of motion that was endorsed late December last year pretty much gone by the wayside. So if our clubs had any kind of optimism that this council actually supported soccer, tonight this has been absolutely dashed. It's no good providing lip service to our clubs that council supports them because it is purely lip service. They can all see it now. They're all watching. Council clearly does not support our soccer clubs, and I'm not going to be censored any longer, and I'm going to say what I need to say. As a leadership group of this council...
Sorry, I need to just deal with this point of order. Councillor Sharp, Councillor Byrne, what's your point of order? So what's the exact...
Sorry, Government's Rules, Clause 76, derogatory
Councillor Sharp, was that in your opinion?
No, not at all.
So the statement that council doesn't care about soccer.
We've just deferred a report, no money allocated to it. Jeez.
I would,
It's
move
my
in this-
opinion.
Okay, in this ruling on the point of order, Councillor Sharp has clarified it's her opinion that council doesn't care about soccer. Yeah,
It's my opinion.
she clarified it was her opinion.
Funny that people have tried to gag me 3 times. I wonder why.
So the point of order has been dealt with. I haven't accepted it because Councillor Sharp was expressing her opinion. Councillor Sharp, you have a minute left on the clock.
As the leadership group of this council, it's a disgrace that I'm sitting around this table listening to such opposition around against a major sporting code within our municipality. I have people say to me that Moonee Valley doesn't support soccer because it doesn't like wogball. Well, you know what? We aren't in the dark ages. We're in 2021. It really saddens me that this is a view held by some members of our community. And I'm just as sad, I'm probably even more sad by the actions of councillors tonight and the clear bias that exists around this table. We have no forethought into what this motion is here. We had the ability tonight to change things, to show our clubs that we support them. My God, they are all watching and they are all seeing the conversations, they're all seeing what's happening around here, and all I can say is an absolute disgrace. So I'm going to direct, and if I get any complaints, they can all go to you guys, because truly we had as a leadership group of council, we are supposed to be here setting the policy direction.
Sharp, just finish your sentence.
It was a policy direction tonight that was provided. It wasn't setting a policy, it was providing a direction so our officers knew where to go. It was setting the scene for a soccer strategy that was already endorsed in December 2020. My God.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Putting the substantive to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Adams, Councillor Bedio, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Isa, Councillor Tyson. Those against? Councillor Nation, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Sypek. That motion is carried. Item 10.6, Councillor Isa has declared a conflict of interest. So Councillor Isa will leave the chambers. Councillors, report 10.6 is electric vehicle charging in Moonee Valley. Do I have a motion? Councillor Adams.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move an alternative that that Council resolves to A, note the report and the opportunities that electric vehicle charging infrastructure presents for policy alignment for Moonee Valley. B, authorise officers to explore opportunities to facilitate user pay electric vehicle charging in Moonee Valley, including applying for funding where possible and exploring partnerships with manufacturers and businesses where appropriate, ensuring any changing infrastructure on council land is universally accessible, not brand specific, and prioritising the use of renewable energy. C, receive further information by the end of August 2021 on the identification, planning and feasibility requirements related to locating viable electric vehicle charging stations within the city for the benefit of the community, with the intent of capitalising on future grant opportunities. D, write to the relevant state and federal government ministers to oppose the introduction of new electric vehicle taxes and request financial and other support for local governments in the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Oh, Councillor Hodgson, thank you. Councillor Adams, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mayor. Although electric vehicle usage and policy in Australia is in its infancy, the electric vehicle industry and technology is progressing, resulting in the number of vehicle options constantly increasing and new models becoming more competitive in terms of price, range and reliability. Many major vehicle manufacturers have already set dates within the decade to stop production of internal combustion engines. On the 17th of April 21, Moonee Valley Sustainability held an electric vehicle festival in Ascot Vale, which was a fantastic community event showcasing electric vehicles and also information sessions on the technology. It was great to see hundreds of people in attendance and the support of all three levels of government speaking very passionately about clean energy. It is obvious that there is growing community interest in electric transport. Council's key priorities and strategies of MV 2040 include Theme 3, Connected, and Theme 4, Green. And specifically our strategic directions, a city at the forefront of transport technology and a city that is cool and climate adapted. This motion authorises officers to explore the potential to facilitate electric vehicle charging in Moonee Valley in response to increasing community interest, our commitment to MV 2040's objectives to become a green and healthy city, and external funding opportunities. With opportunities increasing, Council needs to be more active in assessing and nominating viable sites across the municipality and being ready to make submissions to externally funded organisations as well as grant opportunities as they come up.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Hodgson, would you like to speak to this motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Can I just start with a point of clarification through the mover? Is that all right?
You may, yep.
Whether Councillor Adams in point B, you read ensuring any changing infrastructure. Should that be any charging infrastructure? Just as a...
So I think that's just a
typographical
error.
Oh, yes, it should. Sorry.
Charging.
Yes, excuse me. It should read charging.
It's just a
Thank you,
spelling error.
Councillor.
Issue.
No problem. Look,
Hodgson.
I'm really excited to second this motion. I think this report came to us originally at the officer's initiation, and it's very timely with the electric vehicle festival that was being run, so much so that I think there was a deferral from last council meetings of this item from last council meeting's agenda. It was a really fantastic festival. It was an honour to be able to speak at it, and I think that the recommendations here, I would usually be all for council taking a lead in these sorts of initiatives to support our community to drive down their emissions. I think in this instance, there's definitely scope to working in partnership both with other tiers of government and private market. Sorry, Mayor, I was just a bit distracted there. With the private market to push forward some of these initiatives, and I think as a first step, I really support us exploring those options, noting though that I would be supportive in the future of things coming back for council to do more in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Okay, Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Adams, for putting up this motion, because I really do appreciate the work that you went into to come up with these words. Electric vehicles for me is something that's really difficult, because I would love to drive an electric vehicle, but the fact of the matter is that they're so expensive, and I know that there's something in the report saying that the biggest barrier to owning an electric vehicle is charging stations, but the biggest barrier from just about everyone I ask is the outrageous cost for them. And I understand that the prices are slowly coming down, but they're still out of reach for so many people. So you've got the people who don't want to own a car and don't have their licence and don't, regardless of whether it's petrol or electric, don't want to have one. And then you've got people who can't afford them, and then you've got people that... I do feel like there's something that's missing in the big puzzle of electric vehicles, and I'm not exactly sure what that is. Hopefully the supply can increase, which can drop the demand, but whatever's going on in Europe definitely makes it very, very difficult. But I think this is a sensible motion which is going to help get things shovel ready, that if there is more electric vehicles on Moonee Valleys Road, that we are potentially ready to go if there's grant funding available. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? If not, Councillor Adams, would you like to close?
Nothing further to add, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. If we could get Councillor Isa back. Yeah, just read all my notes. So, councillors, the next item on the agenda is 10.7, and I've declared a general conflict of interest in the next item, so I will invite Deputy Mayor Councillor Hodgson to take the chair.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item on the agenda is 10.7, award of contract number FOL/20/441, Move Facilities Health Club Equipment. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Tyson.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation, Acting Chair.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Councillor Tyson, would you like to speak to the motion?
So this motion is awarding the contracts for the equipment at the new East Kill Leisure Centre, opening in a few months. There's been a rigorous process with multiple applicants and tenderers. We are leasing the equipment over 4 years with the option to extend, and there's been a very rigorous process with it, and looking forward to seeing it in the new facility.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Councillor Byrne? Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? No? In that event, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. We'll welcome Councillor Nation back now to resume his role as chair, if we can find him.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Item 10.8 is the award of contract number 21016, Debney's Park Sports Field and Outdoor Sports Court construction. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Isa.
I'll move the officer's recommendation. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bedio. Councillor Isa, would you like to speak to this motion?
Yes, look, the tender went out not so long ago, so it's been quite a fast turnaround, and we know that this project is going to start very soon. It's the sports development, the development of the sports grounds at Debney's Park in response to the $5 million grant that was received last year to do that. This particular tender was for the realignment and redevelopment of the existing cricket oval and soccer fields, the construction of 2 outdoor multi-lined basketball netball courts, and the construction of 3 lanes of cricket practice nets. And that comes in, it's just under $2 million. The remainder of the $5 million grant will be going towards the Flemington Hub project and the landscaping as well. And just to note that the location of the cricket net still hasn't been finalised, and that a report will be coming to Council in response to the resolution earlier this year, for us to just consider a couple of the potential locations and make sure that we get the location of the cricket nets absolutely right on what is very much loved and prized open space, and very much welcome the improvements, but want to make sure that the use of the park for park users, more general park users, is still optimised. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak to the motion? Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Byrne?
No, thank you. Sorry, Mayor.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Given Councillor Byrne uttered 2 words. Councillor Isa, would you like to close? She technically spoke.
Point, is there something I should be mentioning? No?
No?
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Isa, would you like to close?
Unless, I won't say anything more unless there's something.
No problems. Put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. So item 11 on the agenda is notices of motion, and we have one tonight. So item 11.1, notice of motion 2021/12, activate vacant shop fronts in our commercial and activity zones. I'll call on Councillor Bedio to present his notice of motion.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move that Council resolves to request the CEO provide a report to Council no later than 31 July 2021, which explores the options available to Council to activate vacant shop fronts in our commercial and activity zones, to provide short-term use for local artists, small retailers and community groups to sell, display and discuss their products and services at low to no cost. Officers could look to similar programs offered by Moreland City Council and City of Port Phillip for ideas and inspiration. Any planning or licensing requirements necessary for the use of the spaces are to be managed by Council. A selection process not dissimilar to a grant application process should be used for the selection of tenants, with councillor feedback to be sought for selection.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Adams. Councillor Bedio, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Mayor. I'll keep this really brief. Obviously, we've had quite a long council meeting. The motion's pretty self-explanatory. Unfortunately, our city has experienced a tripling of commercial vacancy rates from 4% to 12.9% between 2019 and 2021, undoubtedly linked to the economic effects brought about by COVID-19. Obviously, this is devastating for our local traders and our commercial precincts, but it does offer us a new opportunity to revitalise these precincts by activating the shop fronts to give potentially people in our community that don't usually have the chance to invest in a store to take part in our commercial precincts. And I really look forward to seeing what the officers come up with in this report. So.
Thank you, Councillor Bedio. Councillor Adams, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Very happy to support this, and thank you, Councillor Bedio. COVID-19 has been devastating for small businesses, and it's so sad to still see vacant shops in our activity centres and business precincts. I think this is a great initiative Council can undertake to activate these empty spaces and drive further foot traffic around these precincts to further support our traders and businesses. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Adams. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion?
We're all so polite.
Any other councillor wish to speak? There we go. Councillor Isa.
I also agree. It's a fabulous motion. Thank you for bringing it, and hopefully it will help to revitalise and bring vibrancy back to shops that are currently unoccupied. And in particular, one of the issues that's arisen for me just in the last couple of days is the knowledge that the community rooms at the bottom of the public housing estate at 120, 126, 130 and 12 Holland, Racecourse Road and 12 Holland Court have been closed to community members since February 2020 and have still not been reopened. And those rooms provide offices for community groups, and the only public space apart from people's living rooms, the only space at the housing estate for people to gather in groups. And a woman was telling me at the weekend about how much women are missing being able to gather in large groups at the housing estate. And if it is possible to find some spaces that through this process for people whose community rooms are still not accessible or whose offices are still not accessible because of concerns around COVID. That would just be a wonderful outcome for community members in Flemington and possibly in other areas of Ascot Vale as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Isa. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, all of the key points I think have been made. I would just note that I think my experience has been that the City of Moreland has done some really great things in this space, and I know that the Mayor has made comment a couple of times to me on that point from the business owner perspective, and really look forward to what Moonee Valley might be able to do as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? If not, Councillor Bedio, would you like to close? We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any urgent business? We have none. Next item on the agenda is 13, confidential reports, and we have none. So that concludes the business on tonight's agenda. We thank those of you watching online, and I declare the meeting closed. Good night.